Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. Today we are talking about my wish list and predictions for the Realm of the Gods set release ban list. This is kind of tricky to do because I don't know if we're gonna get the ban list like maybe the end of this week or next week, or like the last week of February, or maybe beginning of March, because this set's been delayed basically into oblivion. I think it was originally coming out end of January if I'm not mistaken, but it's now been delayed to March. So yeah, we've been getting the reveals really early considering that. And again, I don't know if we're gonna get the ban list like sooner or later. So doing this video now because I have a few ideas about it. There's a lot of cards that people have been talking about as far as like a chopping block's concerned. So again, I will give my opinions on whether or not I think that certain things will happen, won't happen, what I think Bandai will do, stuff like that. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. Let's just jump right into this. Now, getting into this discussion, I think it's really good to work off a set of assumptions because this is the first ban list after the first ever Dragon Ball Super World Championship, where these three decks made top 4, as well as a Green Broly BR starter deck type of hand control deck, which is more or less the same thing as Cell Surge with a few different bells and whistles. So these three archetypes, these three decks, these three colors are the main ones that I think will be the focus of the ban list because they managed to go into the top 4 of Worlds. And I think the community would definitely agree that yellow is maybe a bit overtuned. Green is not really overtuned as a color, but just in terms of the Cell Surge deck, I think it's the one deck you can pretty much consider to be unfair in the grand scheme of things. Now don't get me wrong, we've had far worse formats in terms of like uninteractive decks, not really in the more recent past, but just like back in the day with things like certain Shenron decks, Super Shenron, stuff like that. Cell Surge is sort of like them in the sense of, you know, not really caring about what the opponent does and interacting with that. But yeah, I think in terms of like this big three and this meta in general, Cell Surge would be the one deck that most people could say, yeah, the way it plays is pretty unfair, even though it's not like tier 0 or tier 0.5 or anything like that. It's still that type of deck that I think people can consider it. And then Gogeta Xeno, I will say that we've seen way stronger black aggro decks. So Gogeta Xeno is a very tame version of that, but it's still a very strong deck in what it does. I will say I generally like how Gogeta Xeno plays out, because there's not too much that's actually free in the deck. There's very like low cost things, like most things in the deck cost 1 energy if that. But I say that all that to say that I generally think that there only needs to be very little done on this upcoming set 16 ban list, and I think that's pretty much in line with what Bandai is going to do based off precedent. I think the past several ban lists have been very minimalistic approaches, except for the ban list where they had to nuke red aggro when they kind of missed the mark the first time around in set 14. But besides that, I think they've basically given us a precedent where they're gonna take a minimalistic approach for better or for worse, and that's what I expect them to do here. I don't expect a huge flashy ban list, and I will say too that compared to set 14 and 15, set 16 is looking a lot stronger by comparison. So maybe they don't have to do all that much for set 16 to actually, you know, see some experimentation within the meta. But anyways, I do want to talk about this deck by deck and what I think they may do to each one. Again, I'm for a very minimalistic approach here. I think that's what they're going to do, but we will talk about things that may be on Bandai's radar, maybe on their chopping block. And of course, you guys are always great at this, letting me know what you guys think in the comments below about my opinions or what Bandai might do. So anyways, let's get into this. First thing I want to talk about is Cell Surge, because I generally think that this is the deck that's gonna see a hit, mostly because of that like unfair perception and just how non-interactive it is. And the thing here that most people have been talking about is errataing Ribrianne to a mono green leader only, which I think is an absolutely fine solution. I know there are plenty of players who hate erratas, and I definitely get it. It's very tough to keep up with all these card changes because erratas are thought to be, you know, for like grammatical errors and stuff like that, and when they're used to you know, change the balance of a card, that can be pretty frustrating because you have to memorize a lot of different just like, you know, cards that don't say what they do, which I do understand is kind of annoying. But I think that's a decent change because Ribrianne in like most mono green decks I wouldn't say is like that oppressive of a card. It's just that when you factor in Cell Surge, it becomes a problem. And I really think that has to do more with the fact that Cell Surge is a very non-interactive leader. Like that's where the non-interactivity comes from. If you're playing like a Clash Goku deck or most other green leaders in the game that have to attack the opponent to draw or find cards or what have you, your opponent's going to get those lives. They're going to get cards in their hand, which is going to combat the hand control that you're doing. So in most green decks, you'll give them a card before taking away 2 with rebrand. Cell Surge, you're not giving them a single card. You're fishing the top 5, and then you're basically playing a drop area centric deck. So after you look at top 5, you're pitching whatever card benefits you in your drop area. So I wouldn't be very surprised if they decided to ban the Cell Surge leader. But I think Bandai has a habit of going with what the community thinks is a popular decision. So I would expect them to errata rebrand before I expect them to ban the Cell Surge leader outright. But I think either is a solid solution. I've talked about this a lot, where I think they have to be very, very careful with printing leaders that gain advantage without having to attack the opponent. And what's funny is Cell Surge doesn't even raw plus off of its effect, but it just finds such high value cards by looking at top 5 and adding anything, and again sets up its own drop area perfectly, which allows it to plus in various different ways, like pitching rebrand, pitching Sand Instincts, pitching the Parasitic Cell, stuff like that. So I think they'll go with the rebrand errata. I don't quite think they'll go with the Cell Surge ban, but I think either is a pretty fine approach to this. And this is also the precedent I wanted to talk about, because a lot of people thought they would hit Cell Surge going into set 15, and they didn't, because the deck didn't really have the results to back that up, even though lots and lots of players hated playing against the deck and felt that it was unfair and non-interactive and so forth. But now that obviously it has a world's top 4 under its belt, I think Cell Surge is definitely ripe for the picking in terms of a potential hit of some sort. Next up, we'll talk about Gogeta Xeno. This is the only hit I expect Black to see. I don't see anything else really seeing a hit. I think there was some point in the past where you could have talked about like maybe True Demon God Demigra, but I think we're well past the point where that card is like a super consistent Black staple. I think if they're going to do something, it's going to be to the Gogeta Xeno deck. And I don't really know what the best way to go about hitting Gogeta Xeno is, if any. I would personally be perfectly fine if they didn't really touch the deck in any way. Again, that's mostly because this is a much more tame Black aggro deck than we've had in the past. Think about like full power Vegex, even with or without Universe 3 support, right? I think that the Gogeta Xeno is a far more fair deck. I really don't think they'll hit SS3 Gogeta Thwarting the Dark Empire for a few reasons, one of which is the main selling point of Mythic Booster, which I think they want to see do very, very well. So I think it'd be a little bit awkward to hit that card. But besides that, I mean, that's just hitting a really core fundamental part of the deck. And there are other Gogetas you can play if thwarting gets hit. I just don't see them doing it for whatever reason. But the one thing I think could be a feasible hit is possibly one of or both of the True Fighting Spirits, Goku and Vegeta. These are the cards that oftentimes pose the biggest problem for most decks, but again, I just don't really see how they would hit them. Would they, I don't know, limit them both to 2? I don't really think they would go about it and just ban both True Fighting Spirits outright, because then you're actually just hitting the whole Gogeta fusion engine in general, because you're taking away a lot of the valid fusion pieces that the deck can play, right? So maybe limit them to 2 each. That would be a new thing for sure, and a lot of people have been speculating they might do a limit to 2 type of ban list, because honestly some cards seem pretty decently feasible limited to 2 copies per deck with like a semi-limited ban list. So yeah, I just really don't see how they hit Gogeta Xeno. I don't think they hit thwarting. I think they might do something with True Fighting Spirits, because those are the cards that again propose a lot of obstacles for a lot of decks. But even if they didn't do anything to Gogeta Xeno, I would generally be very, very okay with that, because again, as far as Black aggro is concerned, this is very, very tame. I'm pretty okay with the power level that Gogeta plays at, if I'm being honest. And then next up, the one deck that I think most people will agree with that needs a hit, and it's not really the deck, it's just the archetype, because at the end of the day, Icarus is just good yellow card deck. It's really just every good yellow card in the game plus 4 vanillas that aren't even really vanillas, they're actually super combos. So the deck just draws a crazy amount and plays a lot of the best cards in the game. And one of the reasons why yellow is so strong now that I think a lot of people do realize, but some people don't, the biggest problem for yellow for a long time was a lack of removal, and in the past like 4-ish sets, everything just KOs things in rest mode in yellow now. So yellow definitely doesn't have that problem anymore. It has a leader that draws a crazy amount of cards, and it just has great utility cards like Riposte, like Poutine, like Power over Super Saiyan. What are they going to do to yellow? In my opinion, the best thing to do would be something to Power over Super Saiyan, and I really think that Power over Super Saiyan is a kind of linchpin type of card for yellow good stuff deck. And the reason for that is because the card is obviously free, taps a battle card during unison, so it stops an attack for free every turn. On top of that, it replaces itself and it serves as an extra card that, you know, lowers the cost of your Mecha Freezer Robotic Riposte and your Steadfast Gokus. So I think that a hit to power of a Super Saiyan would definitely rein in the power of yellow in more ways than one. On top of that, also triggering your Poutines and triggering your Bergamos, and they are printing the new Goku Black Kamehameha card, which is a solid card, don't get me wrong, but it costs 1, doesn't tap unisons, so it would definitely be a bit of a watered down version of Power of a Super Saiyan. Now, in my opinion, Power of a Super Saiyan is another example of a card that could be limited to 2 and work well. I think that would be a solid compromise if they didn't want to go crazy on the ban list. But my opinion, they probably are going to outright ban the card if I had to guess. Other people propose other hits to yellow, like possibly banning Icarus, which I think is like okay. I think they would do that, and honestly I think that yellow would be a lot weaker for it, because the other generic yellow leaders you have to play either require more deck space for their engine to operate, which would mean you're playing just a lot less of the just yellow good cards, or you're playing a leader that doesn't rely on other cards but doesn't draw nearly as much like yellow Gotenks, which honestly is a lot worse of a leader than Icarus. It's not a terrible leader, but it's a lot worse than Icarus just on the raw face of it. Some people have talked about banning Poutine. I don't really think they're going to go that route, nor do I think that's a great fix for it. A lot of people just play one Poutine, if that, because it's an off-color card that you can only have one on the field at a time anyway. So I don't think the hit to Poutine going to 0 or even 1 would do much. And Mecha Freezer Robotic Riposte, I just don't see them hitting cards like this, because there's really no precedent for it. They've never hit a card like Dormant Potential. They've never hit a card like Turbo Righteous Aid. I don't see them starting now by hitting Robotic Riposte, even though it's probably the lowest costed Floodgate out there, but it also doesn't cost your opponent cards from their hand or board. They'd have to, you know, tap things to continue to attack, which in some matchups is outright broken, to be honest, but I just really don't think they're going to go with that. I think it's going to be either a Power of a Super Saiyan ban or a possible limit to 2. I also see a universe where they again possibly ban the Icarus leader, but I really think Power of a Super Saiyan is kind of that linchpin card that would definitely pull yellow back a peg or two without actually killing the color. And I think that's a really important thing to do here, is to you know, go about these bans and limits without killing the colors respectively, because when they did it to red, they pretty much brought red to the bottom of the totem pole, which at that time was kind of deserved and necessary, to be honest. But this time around, like, again, minimalistic approach, that's not really necessary in my opinion. I think a lot of people share that opinion as well. Let's just do some hits that rein in some of these decks and allow like some of the new set 16 decks, maybe even some of the set 15 and 14 decks, some room to breathe, some room to operate and stuff like that. So we've covered the big 3, and now I want to talk about one that I think other people also see on their radar, but I really don't see it, and again, it's because of precedent, and that's going to be Soul Striker. Going into the set 15 meta, like how we were kind of going into US Nats blind, where we had just gotten a new ban list, they kind of nuked Blue Yellow Icarus, stuff like that. I thought that Soul Striker would be absolutely everywhere. I thought this was going to be the deck that dominated the meta, and then it wasn't. Didn't even make it to Worlds. It did fine at like several respective nationals, but it didn't really have that effect that I thought it would. And I just don't see Bandai doing anything to Soul Striker, again, because of precedent. If they didn't do anything to sell Surge in going into set 15, I don't see any reason they would do anything to Soul Striker going into set 16, when it doesn't really have those overbearing results. Again, the main thing being that it didn't make it to Worlds, and it just did fine at most of the nationals around the world. Didn't really do anything too crazy. The argument I can see for banning Soul Striker, I think, is a legitimate one, and that's just because, like, why would you play just about any other blue leader in the blue leader pool besides Soul Striker, or, you know, some leader that's tied to an archetype? Like SS4 Vegeta, there's an argument for, because it ramps and Soul Striker doesn't really do that. But as far as like blue good stuff deck, what leader are you playing besides Soul Striker? There probably isn't a valid one, right? But again, based off precedent, I don't see them doing anything with Soul Striker. I don't think they have to do anything with Soul Striker unless they want new blue leaders to see experimentation. But yeah, I just don't see anything happening with this leader, in my opinion. And the final color we're covering today, guys, is red, which again has taken a really big fall from grace since set 14. The one thing I want to see for red is not a hit, is actually a release off the ban list, or I guess like a revert to the errata list, which I know gives a lot of people stomach pains when I mention this, but I would like them to revert the errata to Young Invaders. I think that when they did the whole thing to kind of kill the red crazy aggro that was running out there, I think that the Young Invaders errata was just one step too far, because it basically rendered an entire deck completely unplayable. Like, the main target of that ban list was the King Vegeta BR deck. And they did a good job, again, rightfully so, of making sure that that deck couldn't get out of control with like turn 1, turn 2 kills. But doing what they did and errata Young Invaders was a little bit harsh, made the deck pretty much unplayable because the general theme of it was to give your opponent a Young Invader, and then you would play your various battle cards off of that. Now those effects to play the Young Invaders cost 1, which just like never lets the deck function. It's not able to operate smoothly. And I think that if they were to revise the errata to Young Invaders, basically putting it back to the way the cards originally printed, I don't think the deck would be out of hand. I think it would just be actually another playable red deck going into set 16, in tandem with like maybe some of the U7 stuff, maybe Red Jiren. Those seems like decent decks going into set 16 as well. But anyways, guys, just my thoughts. I've talked about, you know, what I think Bandai will do, what I think they should do, and possibilities. So of course, I want to know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.